Hi everyone. Hello, hello. How's I see Shanti within. Yay. Okay.
Hi!
How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you? I'm so excited to be here with everybody.
I am so excited to have you. You don't even know. This
Well,
is such an incredible treat.
it's good to be sharing this time and space and conversation.
We had a little lag, so I'm just pausing for 2 seconds.
Yeah,
Okay, how is it now?
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yes, I hear you and I see you. Yes. Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for making the time. I know how busy you are and just everything that you do. I am so grateful to you for just being here to share so much of your wisdom and be in conversation and just offer yourself to everyone here.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way about you. Your work is vital. And I think having spaces where women of color can be authentic, purposeful, and intentional about naming so much of the problematic things that are happening, be it with spiritual bypassing, emotional bypassing, white supremacy, all of these things in yoga, wellness, and beyond is vital and pivotal. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Honestly, so I just want to take a moment. I want you to introduce yourself to everyone because if they don't know the badass that you are already, I really want them to know who you are. So if you can do a little soft intro and let the world know.
But very briefly, my name is Anush Vijayakuma. I did see in the comments if somebody asked if I was British. Yes, I am. Born in London, but now living in America and based in California. And I am an adjunct professor at San Diego State University, where I teach on collective liberation and the intersection of wellness and social justice. I am also the wellness consultant for Hoag Hospital in Orange County, where I lead on integrative medicine, meditation, and mindfulness. I work in STEM, evidence-based medicine, and science. Super grateful to do the work that I do. And I'm also the author of Meditation with Intention, with forward by Dr. Sadia Khan, who is my esteemed colleague at Hoag. So an honor to be with you, right, in this about all of
That is amazing. I'm just like hearing all of the list of things, and I'm just like, it's just so incredible. My first introduction to you outside of Instagram was also with Kripalu, and you were doing, I think it was the Bhagavad Gita breakdown that you were doing as well too. So I was just so honored with like the wealth of knowledge and just how digestible you made everything. And so, as we go right into it, when it comes to spiritual bypassing within the yoga and wellness industry, I'm going to do my best to make sure that I don't get too emotionally charged because there's,
emotion.
oh,
God.
yeah,
And I think that's part of it, right? Don't,
yeah,
I mean, we have to be unapologetic,
absolutely,
especially given the time that we're in. So
absolutely.
just say what you have to say.
It's all bullshit.
Exactly.
It is,
Exactly.
it blows my mind how we are here and like even recognizing the colonialism and the capitalism that's being intertwined with the industry itself, just how the West has co-opted and transformed has been a place of like deep pain, suffering, and anger for me. But I would absolutely love for you to just first introduce to us like that idea of spiritual bypassing and how it's showing up within the yoga industry as we see it today.
Gosh, I mean, that we could
I
talk
know.
about that for 2 hours, right? Keep it as digestible and accessible as possible. And I always like to give tangible examples as well. So if we think of white supremacy, it permeates every space, right? We are all existing, you know, in this paradigm of white supremacy that quite frankly is exhausting and never ending. But I want to kind of circle this back to the spiritual and emotional bypassing in yoga. And I wrote that article that went viral, it'll be 4 years ago, which is in wild. Think about that. That was the rise of white supremacy in yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And it highlighted and honed in specifically on the community that I inhabit in San Clemente, California. And it showcased so many of the issues. If you haven't read it, you can read it via the link in my bio. And
I'll repost it as well.
Brought to the forefront the issues of racism, right? The issues of the love wins, yet it can't win when we're upholding oppression and injustice and structural and systemic racism. And it really highlighted how yoga studios were so anti the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes.
And and then the backlash from that was terrifying within my own community and beyond. But the flip side of that was building community with so many people from around the world who were also upset by a lot of what I talked about in the article. And the article also focuses on what is yoga? Yoga as a lived philosophy, yoga as this ancient Vedic philosophy. So it kind of talks a lot about that. And so much of the inability to recognize that and highlighting yoga just as asana. And and it's fascinating then to watch this journey of the individual that I wrote about that then was part of leading the insurrection on January 6th. Everybody supported him in yoga and wellness. He's now in federal prison. And so we have to come back to the point when what you said about speaking the truth. When people of color, when women of color highlight an issue that's happening, be it in yoga, be it in beyond, we're doing it for the betterment of humanity. We're not doing it. In fact, speaking out is to our own detriment and physical.
And that's the thing people don't understand. And that is the thing people don't understand. There isn't a safe space, and there isn't even room for us to actually challenge and push back. And every single time that we try to bring evidence and receipts to the limelight, we're met with not only just rejection, but this aggression that actually even manifests physically, right? And so we are not only just seeing stuff in the comments and in the DMs, but in interactions with people, floodings of our emails, and a direct impact into our lives, where all of a sudden we're now missing opportunities because of a call out that we did, and no one is really there to support us except each other. And so that's why I'm so happy to be in conversation with you, because this is the community, right? Like, this is how we're able to support each other and show up for one another. And even with that article written 4 years ago, today we're finding ourselves again with a repeat. So we had our BLM movement where we got some black squares, maybe a couple of revisions on policies that did not materialize to anything on the ground and anything systemic. So now we find ourselves facing countless genocides, and the yoga industry yet again is completely silent and complacent in its silence, right? And so what have you been really working on educating people or calling people in when it comes to what's happening today and the fact that we're just repeating that same silence?
I mean, I'm not sure that anything that personally I'm doing has changed the community side, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think that's another important point. And this is what I talk to my students about at SDSU as well. Everybody isn't going to want to commit to unlearning and relearning. And that's just a fact. So my focus is on, okay, well, who is
Mhm.
willing to work on adopting a decolonial mindset, who is willing to look at their privilege, to look at their proximity to power, and to begin to unpack what we can each do as individuals, but also the harm that we may be doing consciously or unconsciously. And that isn't going to be everybody. It's certainly not the majority
No.
where I live. I wish it was. And to not, and I say this specifically to women of color that have joined us, to not waste your vital energy and time in trying to convince people of something that they're never going to be convinced about.
Yeah.
And instead to focus that energy on building community and collaborating with people that do. And that,
Can we go back to the collective
honestly,
care and the collective liberation?
and because I think we can also waste and expend far too much energy trying to do the first part of what I said versus the latter. And I think that, to me anyway, is not effective, it's not impactful, and it's not intentional. And so I think looking at this bigger picture, and the key thing for me as well is, and this has been my own lived experience here, I don't have community where I live. That's okay. I have community elsewhere. Where can I build that community, be it online, be it at the university, be it at the hospital that I work at? Where can I continue to build collaborative community networks with the goal of collective liberation for all? Because there, people are out there. There's great people.
They are. Oh, yeah. Oh, they are. Right. I just feel like they're kind of like far from one another. I'm like, where are you? Okay, that's cool. We're still going to find a way to connect and collaborate. And so for those who are actually willing to listen, I have one of the first things. So I first started my yoga journey back in 2009. And when I finished my first class, the thing that landed for me, like the asana was great, but it was the shavasana that was what sold me, right? And specifically, not only was I able to have everything like calmed in my mind, but I was able to do an introspection. And then that introspection and that internal check-in allowed me to show up a little bit better for me. And so I took that to be able to show up better for my community and world. And there seems to be this hyper individualization of the meaning of yoga and the healing that comes from it. Like it's supposed to be just like this thing that helps you be better for you, and community is its own thing. And so I'm going to focus on my self-care and my well-being. And so now I'm a healer, right? So that disconnect between what the individual is doing and the collective calls to action that are embodied throughout all of the other limbs of yoga. How do we start pushing people who want to learn how to integrate into the collective, but aren't really sure how?
I think the most basic understanding would be to acknowledge that yoga is not merely asana. You know, asana, headstands, handstands, whatever it is, it's not going to get us to liberation, even your own individual liberation, right? And so that's number one. So to really move away from the yoga industrial complex, the marketing, the commercialization, commoditization, the bastardization of this ancient philosophy, and to understand, okay, if yoga is an asana, then how can I begin to embrace and unpack and learn more about what it is? Because a lot of people don't want to learn more. So I think that's you know,
that's the first
that's the truth, right?
Yeah.
Is that. And so for those that do want to learn more, to also understand that yes, yoga as a philosophy is a path of individual liberation, but individual liberation is intimately connected to collective liberation in the time that we are in. That's evident. Oh, you know, and if you haven't noticed that, this is a genuine warm invitation to begin to open your eyes, right? And to unpack that coloniality that is seeped into the lenses through which we look around and at the world. And so with this time of great collective and global grief, great collective and global suffering, Of course, my liberation is intimately connected to yours, everybody else's who's joined us today, and others beyond the lines of ethnicity or religion or caste or class or nationality, etc. And we see that with what's happening in Palestine. We see that with what's happening and all the vital work you're doing around what's happening in Sudan and the Congo and Tigray and then Yemen and Myanmar, and the list goes on. So, and then here's a question. I always like to pose questions. If you're unaware of a lot of what we're talking about, then here's an invitation to become aware. It's never too late, right? It's never too late to commit to learning and relearning.
Absolutely. And you're reminding me, like, yoga is political. So we're seeing that kind of being shared amongst activists, influencers. What does that mean for you? And how does that actually translate? So if yoga is political, what are we talking about?
Yoga is political because everything is political. Everything that governs our lives, from the air that we breathe to the water that we drink to local politics, every single thing that involves you as an individual is highly political, especially in the time that we are in. And so to then remove yoga as a philosophy, a lived practice, from your general life is doing yourself, quite frankly, a great disservice, because you're not able to connect the dots. Once we can connect the dots, we can actually begin to understand the impact of yoga as a philosophy, of yoga as political, into the fight. And it is a fight. This isn't, oh, it's not going to happen with all of us joining together, empty blanket statements of love and light and peace. And yeah, peace requires action in these times, right? It has to be loud in whatever way that looks like to you. Your way is going to be my way, that's going to be different to everybody else's way. That's wonderful, because each of us has unique gifts to offer towards this struggle for collective liberation.
Absolutely.
And so if we understand, when people say things like, oh, I'm not political, that's a great privilege. Even be in a situation to say that we're not political. I think of my students. We're a trans-border organization at San Diego State University. We have students that cross the border to come to campus. About that, with the militarization of what's happening on our borders right now, right? Think about that with xenophobia, the anti-immigrant indoctrination that's taken over America. All of this impacts the students that I teach, right? Many of them coming from underrepresented minorities, first generation into higher education, dealing with a list of health inequities because of their social location, because of exactly where they live. And that's what saddens me when we see in yoga these privileged, often members of the dominant culture, making statements like this without acknowledging, hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with having privilege, right? There's nothing wrong with having
use it right.
Power.
Just use it right.
Acknowledge and use it to
And one of the things that I've even tried doing is trying to, like, really sit with even my own privileges. And I keep telling people, like, look, the only difference between me and my family back home in Sudan is my physical location. Like, that is my privilege right now, that I get to be here, that I have access to this, that I am able to make connection. That is a privilege. I'm going to use it. I'm not going to not acknowledge it, because not only, again, am I disservicing myself, but I'm also creating more harm then. Right? I'm trying to remove myself. I'm trying to remove my collective responsibility that's a part of that collective liberation. And that's the thing that constantly frustrates me. So when we're talking about, oh, I want collective liberation, without actively being a part and not seeing what our role is, what our responsibility is within that, that is a cognitive dissonance that's going to keep us trapped and stuck in place, and a wonderful way for us to be paralyzed and inactive with all that's going on. And so with these yoga influencers and with all of the spiritual and emotional bypassing that is going on in the community, the only thing that I find myself still really struggling with in terms of anger is how dare you call what you're doing yoga? Like, how dare you? And it is a point of rage for me. I can't even imagine what you're holding with that.
I feel like I've gone through the myriad of emotions on this journey. And now there's been the anger, there's been the rage, there's been the frustration, and now there's just a level of somewhat of acceptance. Like I said, I want to circle back to what I said. There's the acceptance of, wow. And I think of my own specific community here. These people aren't going to change. They are going to continue to utilize yoga to uphold systems of oppression and injustice and to further their own privilege, right? And I shouldn't say never, because I'm always a person who chooses to live in hope. Perhaps they will have a revelation. It hasn't happened to date. Hopefully one day it will.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to focus on now with my kind of acceptance is, okay, what can I do? And one of the main reasons that I specifically chose to divest from mainstream yoga and wellness, because it was too traumatic. It was too thing. It just became like, I felt like the life was being sucked out of me. And I kind of realized this a few years ago, where I was like, I'm trying to work with all these organizations and it's tokenistic and it's performative. And they don't actually want to enact change. And so, and power to the people that are still continuing on that journey. That journey wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And so I made that decision to divest and to focus, because my work was always outside of that anyway. So, and that was the point. I was like, oh, I'm doing this because I felt called to. And then I realized I'm not feeling called to do that anymore in that space. And so I've just taken my work to broader audiences and spaces within the locations that I exist in and navigate.
So what do you say to someone who's trying to freshly come out of all that is this colonial structure version of yoga, and they're like, okay, I'm seeing it now. What do I do? Like, where do I go from here? Because all of the studios around me are constantly perpetuating systems of harm. Where do I go?
I'll share what I did. I divested, like I said, and I found my online spaces where I could practice. I found my online communities. I found communities. I mean, I teach a lot, and it's so interesting because someone on my page once was like, "This has got nothing to do with yoga," and I was thinking everything that I share, everything to do with yoga, and that's very deeply devastating to me, because if we could actually just understand that, we would get somewhere, right, in this struggle. And if we're not constantly utilizing the philosophy of, and there's so much to it, but specifically the svadhyaya, the self-study, am I looking at myself? Am I looking at how I am upholding harm, how I am contributing to someone's oppression, right? How I am looking at my own implicit bias, whatever it is within. The practice has to begin with ourselves. And I think so often in yoga and wellness spaces, you have clueless people who haven't dealt with their own trauma or their pain or their suffering, that aren't even educated on what yoga is teaching. And it's rooted in egoism, right? And delusion, quite frankly.
Honestly.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of narcissism that really comes with it as well too, and just the harm of someone like that facilitating space and vulnerable people coming into that space. To me, it's predatory. Like, I have no other way of really seeing it beyond that. And so how do we encourage people to protect themselves? Like, we divest, but we're also battling these giant billion-dollar industries that are going on and going around. And so that means of how do we reach people, how do we connect with people, how do we create hubs for them, to me, comes from being in relation with other leaders and creators like yourself, to just start showing like, hey, there are people who are talking about this. There are people who are offering ways outside of what you're seeing in the industry. But also at the same time, when we look through accounts and we look through what we're following, like what are the hashtags that you're following? What are the information that you're taking in? Like what are you allowing yourself to absorb? Right?
Yeah.
And so
would ask themselves that again, who are you following? Who are you choosing to engage with? Who are you choosing? Well, these are all decisions around your autonomy that you can do something about, right? And you can divest from if you choose to, and then you can choose to then invest in other people like yourself who does a lot of work online, offering classes, meditation practices, etc., purely focused on that goal of collective liberation and understanding. And this is what I keep saying to people, because collective liberation has now become like the trending
it's like this buzzword, right? Like
without people realizing that, okay, collective liberation, but how do we get there? We need collective responsibility and we need collective action in order to get to collective liberation. It's like steps.
Yeah. And the resistance to the discomfort is one of the things that I also just want to highlight. Because again, we want to get to collective liberation, but that collective responsibility is a lot of work to unpack. Like you have to hold yourself accountable in ways that most of us really aren't used to, right? And you have to be willing to be called in and called out in order to actually step in. So if you are not willing to sit with that discomfort, if you're not willing to sit with, okay, I have been causing, creating, and enabling harm, and now I'm going to actively work towards dismantling it. If you can't get to that first step of recognizing that your location allowed you to perpetuate harm, even if you haven't been directly engaged in anything, your silence, your passiveness are active participation in it. And if that can't be navigated through and reconciled with, we're never going to get to collective responsibility, let alone collective liberation. So when it comes to teachings, a question for you, what are we talking about when we're saying to sit with that discomfort rather than hide from it so that we can get to that state of seeing, of being?
I love what you just said about the silence. People don't tend to understand that. They're like, well, I'm not saying anything problematic, right? And in their eyes, they're not then doing anything that they perceive as harmful or problematic. However, silence is complicity. And this notion of neutrality, right? So if you're neutral in the face of injustice, in the face of oppression, in the face of direct harm, then you're complicit to that. And you actually are complicit to that.
Yeah.
That all ties into understanding and unpacking the philosophy of yoga, right? So sit with that, because, you know, and let go of the need to be liked. If that isn't the most emotion, you know, everybody likes me. Everybody doesn't like you. Everybody doesn't.
And they don't need to.
Name that.
Everybody likes you, you're doing something wrong.
And everybody doesn't like you. Let's be honest, right? I was trying to explain this to my 5-year-old son, and I realized that it's a valuable lesson to learn as early as possible, because no matter what you do, everybody isn't going to like you. And so accept that and then focus on actually liking yourself. And that's what I said to my students at the end of last semester. I got really emotional with everything that was happening around the world, specifically in Palestine. And I just said to them, you know, let go of the need to be liked and ask yourself instead, do you like you? Are you okay with what you're doing? When you go to sleep at night, are you able to accept the actions of your day? And if you aren't able to accept them, what can you commit to doing differently tomorrow?
Absolutely. Even if it's one thing. And one of the things I just told one of my clients is, it is better for you to do a 1% sustainable change than to try and go 100 and burn out as quickly as you started. Right? The journey that we're on, this social justice, this dismantling of systems, is a long journey. Like, I would love to think that I can see the vision that is in my mind manifest in my lifetime. But I I don't believe that with how many people are so adamant about maintaining the status quo. And so I have to own and understand that this is generational work. And my job is to make it a bit easier for the next generation. I don't have to do it all because that overwhelm can be so detrimental into stunting our participation and silencing us just because, well, what am I doing? I'm not effective. I'm not effective. There's no change. I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything. But you are. You really are. Because not only are you impacting you, you're impacting your circle. And then your circle has their own circle. And so this is a call-in for consistent and persistent change and activism that requires you to truly sit with all that is going on and make an effort, just an effort in trying to do that little bit better, because that is so much more profound than you think it is. It truly is. It truly is. And so if we go from here to here and recognize that the here impacts the here, can we not see that everything is so interconnected with one another?
Exactly. I love that. And I love how you've summarized that it's not all going to happen overnight.
No.
And quite frankly, I've been working in social justice and activism for over 20 years now. I began at a grassroots level in London over 20 years ago, working with Elam Tamil migrants, refugees, my own people who were fleeing genocide and
Singing to the tigers.
So nothing is going to happen without continued, dedicated, sustained. And that's why we have our yoga practice. Yeah. I often am like, how do you have the energy to continue doing this work? What and the practice, my yoga is my container for my grief, for my joy, for my sadness, for my happiness, for my frustration, for my anger, for my rage, for all of it. It is my container. And that is why practice is to sustain us in times when it is overwhelming, right? Especially when, and we have a choice. And some days it's easier than others to find hope versus the days it's just not. Our practice for us to hold us up in those times when we feel hopeless and we feel helpless. And to me, to your point, if everybody could do something, 1% that you talked about of sustainability, then something changes. If everybody, which is kind of what we're seeing right now, does nothing, then changes. And everybody can do something in this process towards collective liberation for all, not just collective liberation for the few.
Exactly. And you said something so profound there. The practice. So to me, it lands in two ways. So there's that radical self-care that I always try like pushing on everyone. I'm just like, think of it this way. And I had this conversation with a student yesterday. The movement requires care, right? We are the movement, right? The movement is the people. And so if the people are not caring for themselves, the movement falls. And so that practice, that coming to your, I'll say mat, but that coming to your mat is your time to nourish so that the movement can be sustained. Right? And then another thing that is also being brought to mind when we're talking about that longevity and how long the work needs to be done for. But one of the things that my practice really taught me was patience, 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 patience with discomfort, patience with not having control, patience with not always knowing, right? And there's something about not always knowing what's going to come next that leaves people so distressed and distraught and causes and lives anxiety. And so we want to find ways to control. We want to find ways to manipulate things around us. And we can't. Like we just simply can't. But what we can do is check in with ourselves. What we can do is ensure that we're grounded, anchored, and rooted so that what's in our circle of control can come from a space that is grounded in care and love and compassion. Right? And that to me just speaks to your earlier point of like, we're not putting our energy there. And we don't need to try and convince the people who want to weaponize a spiritual practice for a colonial pursuit. And so we come back to community, we come back to the things where we can truly be grounded. And I just love that because there's so many layers into everything you just shared.
And I love what you just said about weaponizing the spirit towards upholding coloniality and white supremacy. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And
100%.
yeah, and I think, you know, as we kind of end our amazing discussion, it's been so, you know, a true blessing to be able to share this space with you, is to remind people to be unattached to specific outcomes. You know, we have to keep doing the work because the work needs to be done. And it probably isn't going to go according, because I'd have collective liberation today for everybody.
Yeah. If there was a button, show me where the button is. Let me push it. Let me sit on it. Let me do whatever I need to.
That's not how. So we have to continue to have the dedication, the resilience to continue this deep, deep work and effort that honestly is only becoming more necessary. And I can see that in my own lifetime.
Absolutely. And with that, to wrap up, I just want to remind everyone, when we think about even Black and Indigenous struggles in Turtle Island, North America, it has been 600 years of work. And we're still not there yet. And we still have ups and downs. We take 2 steps forward, we get sent 5 steps back. We can't stop because the alternative is the loss of our existence. And so, yes, there's going to be a lot of times where you are angry and infuriated with what is happening, but that cannot be what deters you or stops you, because we must maintain our active role in fighting for collective liberation.
Yeah. And to that point, something that I've realized that they do a lot of within yoga and wellness spaces is talking about intergenerational trauma. And what I like to remind myself of and others is, yes, of course there is that, but there is also intergenerational resilience, intergenerational joy. And I feel that from my own ancestors. Absolutely. Every joy, the resilience, the lifting me up. And so how can we focus on that, right?
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That last reminder, thank you. I always try and like hold that in, but this is why we are here, to remind each other, because sometimes we get lost in what we're going through, right? So,
and we fall on our ancestors, and we are taught not to. White supremacy fall on our ancestors.
Oh, yeah. They don't want us having access to that.
They don't want us
access to or liberated.
To find that strength, to have that power, you know. And so just this invitation to everybody to remember, you are far more courageous and resilient than you may realize. And the moment that you start that journey, right, you'll begin to tap into your